Association's Medical Technology Working Group. As a part of our series, we're offering WMA members 5 educational webinars on AI in medicine. And today's topic is current and future applications of AI in medicine. We are just so delighted and excited to have an expert from the University of Zurich, Dr. Michael Krauthammer, who received his medical degree from the University of Zurich and then a PhD in biomedical informatics at Columbia in New York. He was on the faculty at Yale University for many years, leading a research team in biomedical informatics, doing fundamental work in cancer genomics. And then in 2018 went back to Zurich, where he now leads a large medical informatics group. We are really delighted to have him join us today, and we're going to let him provide a brief presentation, after which we'll engage in some Q&A.
Thank you so much for having me, Jesse, Jacob. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Let me share the screen now. All right. Okay, can you see my screen, Jesse? Good?
Yes.
Good, very, very well. So welcome to this discussion on current and future application of medicine, of AI in medicine, and I'm just having a short intro talk now. So what we're doing especially in my group also is like we try to build systems that emulate, really, we should say emulate at this point, expert thinking, and put that expert thinking into computers. Like a radiologist who has worked for 30 years at a hospital, a lot of artifacts, like the report she's written and the images she's seen, and we can access them through the electronic health record system and feed that to an AI machine to actually emulate kind of this diagnostic process. And so we'll see later, this works really nice. We can also build machines that help us look a little bit into the future, make predictions, like a patient who's doing well today in the present might not do so well in the future, and maybe adjust the treatment ahead of time. And more, we are doing all of this with conversational agents in one way or another, either for asking questions from the patient side, but also from healthcare professionals. And these tools and the interface that they're allowing us to have with computers will certainly be more and more dominant. And so we're looking at that too. And we believe that these tools and methods can improve some of the issues we're facing in healthcare, like quality of care. That we obviously have different quality of care across hospitals. We have errors. We hope that the computers can alleviate some of that. We do have workforce issue. Obviously, there's a global issue, especially also after COVID. For example, in Switzerland, not enough nurses. We also have definitely a shortage of physicians. And I guess that's also true in some other ways across the globe. Innovation is a little bit an issue. That's a slide I'm showing here that shows that despite we having more and more expenditures for research, right, the number of approved drugs is actually quite stagnant. So we should potentially use AI to kind of accelerate that. And costs, right, is a huge problem. I'm showing here numbers from the European Union, but with Switzerland being likely one of the more expensive healthcare systems. And so how can we potentially curb costs using these AI tools? So certainly all these issues, I'm going quickly through them. How AI can potentially improve some of these problems. So let's talk about quality. And I'm very fascinated by that in 2015, it was shown that AI can actually beat humans in recognizing objects in everyday photos. And only 2 years later, out of Stanford, it was shown that computers can recognize skin cancers as good as dermatologists. And then rapidly after that, it was shown in radiology and pathology for recognizing, for example, cancer lesions, that the AI can really is in par in terms of performance. And today you can buy roughly, if you go to the FDA side, there are thousands approved FDA approved systems, right? Most of them are assistive in one way or another. So they assist the physician in making a diagnosis or to do other medical tasks. There are many nuances there, how the AI works, and we'll talk about this certainly during the discussion. Is it direct support or support in the background and so forth? It's often shown in clinical studies where they compare physicians alone versus physicians and AI, that there's typically an increase in performance, and that AI does mistakes, physicians make mistakes, but that together is essentially what brings a lot of benefits. And these days, we have to talk about large language models like ChatGPT, and they've become very good, as you know, in solving medical cases. What you see here is the performance of the latest generations of large language models in answering exam questions from the USMLE. This is the American exam to get a medical license. And you can see that they're getting really good, up to 90% correct answers for these tests. And it's way above the passing grade and what an average medical student would achieve. So that's very impressive. And not surprisingly, we see the first clinical studies coming out showing that LLMs might improve physicians' clinical reasonings, that by themselves, they're also pretty good. They also, these early works show that the combination of physicians and LLMs, there's still some issues, kind of how do we interact with those, how we trust them. And so, but overall, it shows that it helps. And I think we can agree that physicians already are using these tools quite extensively. So I want to quickly show some cases where we make progress here in Zurich. For example, in rheumatology, a typical thing they're doing is they're looking at nail fold capillaroscopy. So they put a microscope on the nail fold, that you see these beautiful capillaries if you're healthy. Certain rheumatoid diseases, this is destroyed, these beautiful patterns, and they look at using the microscope to find these patterns. We use 17,000 of these images out of the archive, trained in AI, and the AI, without much tinkering, really achieved classification performance almost on par with those rheumatologists. So really simple. Take the images, train, and you get really good performance. So this could really support physicians in the future. We're working a lot in looking into the future, making better decisions. These are just some examples from rheumatology, ICU, like predicting delirium in the ICU, predicting organ involvement, systemic sclerosis, for example, predicting lung decline ahead of time, and assisting patients with chronic diseases such as inflammatory joint diseases to change medications if it's necessary. But we're doing cool stuff also, like, and I think this is going to be huge in the future, voice-based diagnosis, right? So, for example, we work with Philip Homan here from the psychiatric unit to listen to patients with schizophrenia and make the classification of the disease using voice-based analysis. So that was all about quality, just showing you some vignettes, how AI can really kind of get into kind of this diagnostic process and help us improve our diagnostic capabilities. Work satisfaction is obviously a big thing. Everyone talks about this. We're spending, and I know, and I'm sure that's true for some of you, up to 50% in front of the electronic health record system screen, typing, and that we have to reduce that to, I don't know, 30% total of our workday, or 20%. Ideally, we have to reduce it. And so we can reduce also the burnout rate, right? And we're working here with, this is an example from my group, with Thomas Frauenfeld, who's head of radiology in Zurich, but also Scott Sheen from Kyoto University, to build automated tools, for example, to help radiologists automatically write reports for their X-ray, also CT images. And it will be, the way we're going is that we're doing that very interactively. So we're building an assistant where you can ask the system, like, show me the pathology, how big is the heart, can you write me a report, can you translate that to a different language, all of that kind of an assistive tool. That's what we're building. And I think these kind of very kind of convenient kind of conversational agents, that's really where things are going. Just a quick thing here, which I think is fun to show that there are other like more operational usages of AI. Like we don't have enough nurses. I told you that before, like after COVID, and to reduce the burden on the nurses, kind of what we could use AI that can overview the care demand of the patients at any time in the moment. So to foresee on which ward there will be most demand in the near future. And so there's an optimal allocation of nurses, and that also will lead to better work satisfaction. Costs, there are many ways we can use AI to reduce costs. I'm just trying to give you one vignette here from a fun example. At our hospital here, we have about 20% of times the patients just don't show up to the MRI machine. They're idling. It costs the hospital money. So we actually wrote an AI that profiles patients. Yes, we profile them to predict who will come to the exam and who will not show up, right? And actually the AI worked fine, and we implemented it, gave the patient an extra call, but the patients didn't show up anyway. So it shows that AI is not always all you need to fix a problem. There are also other issues to make things better. Just quickly on innovation, I mentioned it before. Maybe AI can help us get drugs faster to the market. We'll talk maybe later about some of these technologies like AlphaFold, but we're building similar tools here, for example, for genetic diseases. We have about several 10,000 of genetic diseases. Many of them are single point mutations in the DNA. And we could potentially use CRISPR or gene scissors to fix those mutations. The point is that for every mutation, you need a different scissor to fix the mutation. And so my team has been building over the last year AI tools to automatically design such a gene scissor for any particular mutation you have. And up here, you see the shape of these gene scissors, very complicated, and the AI can help you build a part of this. What you see here is the guide RNA of these gene scissors. All right, so that was quickly showing how AI can improve some of these pertinent issues in the healthcare system. And I'm going just quickly into the future, because I was also asked to talk about the future. Nice to maybe mention Daniel Kahneman here, who kind of tried to, from a psychological standpoint, show how do we think, and we have this fast system to drive a car or a bike, and there's a slow system where we do thinking, and it's so these two systems somehow exist in our head, and I think it's fair to say that the current AI systems are pretty good in emulating system one. I'm sorry, I will turn on the light switch later, but okay, it's going on again. So it can emulate system one quite well, but not so much system two right now. There is new work in agentic AI that tries to solve issues for system one type of reasoning, the complex reasoning, but we're not quite there yet. But it will get there. And as we going into that direction, we have to ask ourselves, will we remain the sole authority in medicine, or will we give up what the philosophers call epistemic authority, the authority to make decisions to the AI? And we should not forget, and I'm very fascinated by this book by Paul Starr, which I recommend to read, about the transformation of the American medicine infrastructure. I mean, like 200 years ago, everything was unregulated. There were no medical schools. And now we're in this phase where medicine is flourishing, with medical schools, everything's clear. But there will be a forthcoming transformation, and things will not stay the same as we know medicine today, for sure. It has changed, and it will change into the future. And this is just my current thinking, how, what will happen in the next few years. What I call here AI-guided care, meaning these are potential pathways which we can slowly delegate, potentially, fully, why not, to AI systems, if they're simple enough, like blood pressure control. I mean, you can also talk about insulin control. If someone has a cough, and we could have an AI-powered chat, I think, to help this patient go through it and make a first assessment and potentially even treatment, using wearables to control kind of the outcome. I could see that happening for very, very simple pathways. But obviously, medicine is complex, and AI can just assist in these different domains. And if you have multimorbidity, rare diseases, if you have an intervention plan. But here, obviously, AI, I mentioned before, can help you do better, faster documentation, easier documentation. AI-powered decision support, and robotic surgery. Also, all these things will come slowly and will change the more complex part of medicine. Yeah, and just want to end with this slide from Eric Toppel's book on deep medicine, that maybe that's a renaissance for medicine. That's the techno-optimist outlook, that we have more times for patients and higher quality care. So, but obviously there are many concerns, and I'm sure we're going to discuss these in the next couple of minutes. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say. I think we have time now for the discussion, and I'm going to de-share my screen. Just give me 1 second.
Thank you so much,
Dr. Krauthammer. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just turning on my...
So thank you so much, Dr. Krauthammer. That was a real wonderful overview. And I think the takeaway from just that is that it doesn't look like that there is going to be a single aspect of our practice that won't be touched by AI in some way or the other. So now, as we go into the discussion, we're going to be looking at 4 broad sections. You've talked a lot about them as we've gone through: AI and diagnostics, decision support, predictive analysis. Then we'll move to treatment, surgery, personalized medicine, then patient engagement, monitoring, digital health, and then cybersecurity. So a lot of use cases, a lot of things that come there. You were talking about AI emulating experts, and I think we've started to see that because of the vast data sets that are available, and like from what radiologists do, dermatologists, and other specialties, we're seeing that that is a rising field. What has your experience been? Where do you see that aspect going? Do you think, we'll be seeing radiology as a specialty completely being transformed? It's, in the next few months, years?
Yeah, I mean, there will be transformations, right? Again, we don't have enough radiologists, so I don't, they won't be replaced. I think what I'm hearing is that, hey, can we use AI to, go through the easy cases, right? For example, if you have a chest X-ray, right, which is normal, right? Do I really have to look at that, and can't I just focus on the more complex cases, right? And so I think we will see a lot of that, right? Where AI can, with high certainty, kind of find kind of normal, examinations and essentially, or prioritize examinations. And I think that's, for example, what will happen in radiology, right? And it will support this report generation. I mentioned that, right? It could also be, I could also see application, I mentioned a little bit before in the background, right? Quality control, right? When you look at the slide as a pathologist and you say it's normal, but actually you didn't see this one lesion. So, it could come back to you and say, are you sure? So it's happening, right? But it's not a replacement, right? I think it's just a focusing on the more difficult cases. And I think that's going to happen, right?
You talk a lot about this concept of AI as an assistive technology, scaling capacity, allowing teams to re-engineer workflows, do more with the same human capital. But you also at the end sort of talk about how there may be care pathways where the AI can really take over, and maybe there's a human in the loop to supervise and correct if there are problems, but a cough pathway, blood pressure titration might become something that's independent. How do you see that all coming together in a way that doesn't fragment care? And at least, obviously this is a World Medical Association webinar. We have a global audience. In the US, we're seeing lots of digital health startups and products and companies that work on a very specific area, weight loss, diabetes control. And one of the challenges that I think we're having, and this is mirrored to some degree globally, is in fragmentation through the use of these sort of automated technologies. I'm curious, how do you see that all coming together in a way that ultimately gets our patients the care that they need,
Right.
but in an efficient manner using these technologies?
Right. So I think one insight for me in the last couple of weeks was I had the opportunity to visit a telemedicine company here in this country, and they have a chat supported pathway. So patients, chat with the doctors. The doctors are anywhere in Switzerland, right? And then they get the questions. I have a cough, right? And ChatGPT is already integrated in the sense that the next answer, essentially, it's just there's some integration happening to help them guide this discussion, right? And I could just see if you have 10,000, let's say a million of these discussions, right? That at one point, do you really still need total human supervision, right? And so that's there I see it, right? And then you ask about the fragmentation. I mean, we have to be we have to know that ChatGPT is a multimodal technology. So it obviously can, you can add voice, right? You can upload images, impressions, skin lesions. So I think the fragmentation is kind of, it's taken care of a little bit through the vast capability of these tools, right? Rather than have tons of little AI tools, it's one big machine. That's one thing. So here, that's why I said about this cough assessment, right? I could see that really being taken over, and this would take a lot of pressure off at least primary care here, and I'm sure also in other countries. But I share your concerns about the fragmentation. I also don't see how all these myriads of startups, right, make an effective case, right? How they can be integrated.
Yeah, I completely hear what you're saying, because right now, being involved with a number of health tech startups and in that ecosystem, everyone is trying for different use cases, but the ones that are getting the most initial traction are the early administrative, the clinical decision support, clinical, the ones that apply and have clinical outcomes are still taking time to actually being seen. And a lot of these things are still in the trial basis. And I think across the world, different places are doing it based on their regulations and their, policies behind it. We're facing a lot of challenges when it comes to these data sets and training. What do you feel like in terms of, algorithm bias and, seeing these false positives that come out? How do you integrate that sort of feedback into developing your solutions or your AI solutions without these kind of biases, or at least trying your best to eliminate them?
That's a whole field of research, obviously, how to minimize bias. And I think, that's obviously what we should do, right? And we talk a lot about, having criteria that it's inclusive in your training data, that you're not leaving a certain share of the population out, and it's all important. But we also have to be clear that we will not, that no AI system will be unbiased. And here maybe we can, touch on. I think we might talk a little bit later on this too, about kind of, I call it somehow the double standard, right? We expect AI to be totally unbiased, right? But we have to agree that we humans, or human physicians, are biased too in our own very own way, right? And so we have to kind of deal with that in a way, right? How we understand our own biases, how we are skeptical of some of the AI answers, but it's obviously tricky. But,
yeah, if you come back to that example that you gave about cough, right? Maybe as being sort of an autonomous pathway or blood pressure control. The data quality is obviously important, but if you have 100,000 cases, right, that you've modeled the interaction on, you expect things to be pretty effective. But you do have model drift, right? And so there's a different opportunity when I think about how do you support a physician who's been in practice for decades, in assuring quality. There's just a different opportunity when you're using a digital tool like an AI-enabled care pathway to do, either post-market surveillance if it's something that's been cleared, or sort of ongoing quality control at scale in a way that is really impossible with individual practicing physicians spread out without really the oversight. So I think we do have those underlying data quality bias issues that are not unique to AI. They appear in all of these digital tools. But I do think there's a different opportunity, and I'm curious. We have all these questions about trust, right? How do I know I can trust the output of the tool? And there's a lot of things that I think at a practical level we're trying to, in our world, share, very practical advice to physicians as they're looking at tools and who's developed them, how. But I'm curious from your perspective, when you're looking at an algorithm, what are some fundamental things that you would advise, listeners here today to be asking, to be thinking about when it comes to, how do I know that this is something that I might want to incorporate into my practice, my clinic, my health system? How should I be thinking about some of these things around validation and trust and bias and model drift? Because, there are informaticians like the three of us who have some detailed knowledge, but I think most physicians are really just struggling to keep up and try to understand, what are the questions I ought to be asking. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that, given all of your expertise.
Right. So yeah, it's important to trust these machines. And I think in medicine, we have an advantage, right? That we are used to establish quality of a tool, right? It doesn't have to be a tool, and we can reuse some of these approaches. So obviously, we can validate this tool like any other tool, right? We can, if I develop something here in Zurich, I can give it to Jesse to work and see whether it works in your office, and you can give me feedback, right? And then we would write a paper on this and say, well, yeah, it generalizes to an American population, right? And so I think we have a lot of that, right, which is already well established in medicine, right? Whether a tool is robust and efficient. But beyond that, there are some special things we should look at. On the one hand, you want that the tool can explain itself. And always that's a term, like what does it mean? A tool can explain itself. But I think, ChatGPT can explain themselves pretty well, right? You can ask, why do you think this is the case, right? And I think we'll see a lot of that, right? And some of this explanation might really resonate with you, and you might accept it. Another big thing is the tool. You want to make sure that your tool can express uncertainty. So if a tool says, I believe there's a fracture, and let's say I'm 100% sure there's a fracture because I've seen 10,000 cases like that, don't worry, accept my judgment. Or the tool can tell you, well, it's outside my training data. I've never seen this case, and I think it's a fracture, but I can't tell you for sure. So I think there should be some sort of a dialogue like this, and yeah, and that's another point I want to make, right? It's in the end, the judgment is with you, right? And only in certain cases can we eventually delegate, right? For example, a chest X-ray with no pathological finding. Maybe at one point we can just cede that to the machine. I think that's fair enough, given that we show that it's generalizable and robust and everything.
You hit on a topic that's been a theme in all of the webinars, which is the difference between prediction and judgment. And these algorithms can be very, very effective at making predictions if they have the right data in the right scenarios. But when there isn't data to make a prediction, that's when the physician, the human, needs to step in and use their clinical judgment to ultimately guide a patient through their care pathway. And I think that's probably a nice place to segue to our next topic. Is that right, Jacob?
Yeah, absolutely, Jesse. Because now what you were, we have our SOPs, we have our guidelines, which basically give us guidance on treating population sets or clinical sets. But now with the advent of AI, we're able to deliver very personalized care in a very high fidelity manner. What is the kind of aspects, Dr. Krauthammer, that you're seeing this delivery of personalized care, personalized drug development, sort of one-on-one unique
Right,
development for the patient directly?
right. Um, yeah, I mean, I showed you the example of a gene sister, right? That could potentially fix your genetic disease, right? But more general, I just want to go quickly into this guideline-driven care versus kind of personalized care. So
Yeah.
I just want to say one thing. We're working on that for tumor board setting, where for patients that start the chemotherapy, so early in the treatment, AI can help find the correct guideline, right? That's already a challenge sometimes, right? Given competing guidelines or guidelines that are updated all the time. And it's very hard to keep track. So I think AI can already help even in guideline-driven care, help to find, it's still your judgment, which guideline, but the AI can help. And so we're working on that. And then, for example, it's good to give an example. So let's take cancer, right? When you beyond standard of care, and there's no guideline anymore, you could then try to figure out something very personal. You take that patient, all his genetic background and so forth, look in the archives or some other data sets. Any patients like this, right? And so this AI-driven patient similarity search, doing personalized cohorts and figuring out what could work, right? And I think we will see quite a bit of that, dashboards, right, that help you kind of make use of your own data, right, to make a personalized prediction. So working on that. In it, I think this data-driven kind of constant learning systems, right? I think that's where I see personalization coming in.
In your presentation, I think you might have alluded to, the Nobel Prize winning AlphaFold 3. I'm wondering, I'll show a quick video for our audience, and I'm wondering if you can maybe give a quick explanation of what is AlphaFold 3 and other sort of sets, and why are they so important, and what they're doing for us as physicians in terms of drug discovery.
Right. So AlphaFold was kind of the first tool to show that AI is really capable of predicting the 3D structure of proteins, essentially the workhorse of our cells, right? The workers of our cells. And so the folding is really hard to predict. And only once you know the fold, or the structure, 3D structure, you know the function, exactly how it functions. And then once you know how it functions, right, and how it folds, you can develop exact drugs that inhibit or enhance certain of these functions. So you need the structure. And this took years to do before using traditional tools. This you can now do for any protein, really, to to some degree. And then so essentially, if you have a protein, and you want a drug against that protein, you need that 3D structure. You can get it now in an instant, essentially. So it's huge, right, for drug development. I just want to say that this is the first step, right? You have to really understand this is the first step for drug development. That there are many similar tools now, for example, for protein-protein binding prediction, right, and other types of important mechanisms for drug development. And so protein fitness optimization. So for example, if you have a protein and you want to make it even more effective, so you can also use AI to do that. I think it will accelerate drug development a lot. And that's just on the target discovery, right, or the compound discovery. AI can also help in the clinical development of the drug, like how you run trials, how you recruit patients. I think, which obviously takes typically 11 years, right? Maybe we can shorten that too, right?
Dr. Krauthammer, as you talk about drug development, obviously there's a lot of opportunity here using platforms like AlphaFold, but there's also some interesting things going on just in the AI-enhanced medication administration management sort of space. And we've had this sort of odd experience in the US that's different than I think what's happened in Europe and other parts of the world with closed loop control systems, where there's been some reluctance to see adoption. And I'm an anesthesiologist, so I do a lot of sedation, and there was a U.S. product called Sedasys that was a closed loop control system for propofol for sedation, deep sedation, that was ultimately pulled from the market, not because of any regulatory issue, but nobody bought it. There was no market acceptance of a closed loop control system. That was a decade ago. I think we're in a very different space today with understanding of AI and how these closed loop control systems might allow more effective adjustment of medication delivery in real time. But there are other considerations. I'm curious, what are you seeing from your perspective globally around some of those delivery system opportunities, and what might be some of the current barriers to widespread adoption?
Right. I don't have so much familiarity with closed loop systems. I do work with a person in Zurich who works in neuro ICU, right, who tries to develop monitoring systems for doctors, right? You said something was approved, right, 10 years ago, which is amazing, right? I see, at least here in the Western Hemisphere, there's a lot of regulatory hurdles to actually make this happen, right? You have to, and you have to really prove this works, right? And as you know, in a surgery, things go quickly left or right, and you have to adjust, and so there's no standard situation really. And I could just see regulatory. That's really hard to make this happen, and that's what I hear essentially, right? That it's extremely hard to get regulatory approval because cases are much more complex, and you have to report all the things that can go wrong, and it's not that clear. Kind of, is that due to the AI now, or is it due to some other setting? So I think it's a regulatory issue that is really hard, right? I think, but other than that, I see a lot of opportunities, right? And but if there's no market, maybe you can talk more about that, right? Why you think it was not adopted, right?
Well, I think there are issues around trust, and I think, again, a product that was introduced 10 years ago, given the experience and the collective awareness of being in an AI era, and when we believe we can offload certain tasks to these products, is probably very different today than it was a decade or so ago. Would be my perspective. I'm not sure, Jacob, what you're seeing in your perspective and your clinical space of emergency medicine versus sort of other acute care settings like the operating room, but maybe that's a piece of this.
I think there is a gradual transition, being out of direct care for a while. I'm not going to directly say anything in that space, but what I can see is, um, there is more of a broad adoption rather than direct clinical that reaches the patient and that potentially can result in harm. So that hesitation is still there, and the regulatory things that go through that. So right now we're still seeing it being used in a more of a operational, logistical, administrative sort of approaches, and the ones that are coming and having direct access or direct implication for the patient, like you were talking about in terms of closed loop systems or drug delivery, those are still in the process of being approved and having a real life application. I think we've been speaking about, the precision-based and personalized medicine, which is quite interesting. There's so many things to touch upon, but since healthcare doesn't end or start at the hospital door, but once the patient leaves the hospital, we're seeing AI helping and being a part of that, extending the care of doctors, going through that, going past once they even leave. That they're always in a way always connected, wearables and chat bots and all of these digital therapeutics. Any thoughts on that and where we're going to see that evolving to, Dr. Michael?
Yeah, so I'm fascinated by kind of how AI is actually a trickle down thingy, kind of, right? Where knowledge that was only available to physicians, right, is now suddenly in patients' hands, right? And so it started with, I would say, with Google, right, where the knowledge was exclusively in the physician side, is now at the patient side right now. But imagine that patient is now an AI on his or her side, right, guiding him through the complaint. So I think, we see a lot of that happening, right? Personal guidance just through chatbots. And I could see the same with wearables, right? For blood, let's take blood pressure control, right? I could really see a situation where you have a smart AI guiding you with your blood pressure medication or your intake of food, right, and help you, just be optimally, the dosage are just optimally adjusted for just your personal well-being. And I could really see that actually, it's not a closed, maybe it's a kind of a closed loop system, right? But it's a low risk closed loop system, let's put it this way, is likely the better care than if you go every half year to your primary care physician who takes your blood pressure and maybe incorrectly, right? Could happen, right? For some. So you have to do repeat testing. And so I could see that happening, right? So I see this trickle-down effect where patients have much more essentially power, right, in guiding the healthcare delivery.
Jesse, what do you feel?
There's a lot of excitement.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think there's a lot of excitement in when you look at sort of these virtual assistants, what's happening with conversational AI, opportunities for patients to really engage in their care in different kinds of ways. What I see globally is those tools can be very effective for a particular problem or acute issue, but are more challenging when it looks to engage a patient in a long-term delivery process. So you see this with some of the in the weight management space where people have difficulty, the stickiness is a problem, engagement rates drop off frequently over time. But if people are trying to solve a particular issue, an acute challenge, these virtual assistants that can use a chatbot to triage symptoms, provide education can be very effective. But engaging people in long-term behavioral changes, keeping people on these pathways to optimize health, I think there's probably an important place where, those personal interactions with a physician or a care team in the healthcare system may not pivot away into the digital space, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a really important space for conversational AI, virtual assistants, remote patient monitoring to support that. I'm curious if you have any perspective on how those things may or may not come together in the long term, Dr. Krauthammer.
Well, just a couple of thoughts. You talked about compliance, right? There's digital compliance, kind of, that is very soft. That we see that all the time. I fully agree. I mean, I've been thinking about that. People don't really want to engage with these tools all the time, right? It should be in the background. So one thing is embedded sensors, right? That monitor, right? But you don't have to actively engage, right? This could be sensors in your bathroom or some hidden, right? But that would then necessitate that you allow these things to monitor yourself, right? And I definitely see this problem, right? And I don't think behavioral change AI can help with that, right? I mean, we need this is a really, really tough topic, right?
A question for, I guess, all of us, but do you see a place at some point where you would have created a digital twin of yourself that your patient can interact with offline? Jesse, Dr. Krauthammer, what do you guys think?
Well, maybe if you can start. Well, we've been thinking about it here in Zurich. We did a year-long a continuous workshop on how the future of medicine will look like. And I think we're believing that digital twins will essentially be very important. The problem right now is that we don't have the data to feed those twins. A twin can only is only meaningful if it's constantly fed by really good data about all levels of your bodily system, right? From the cellular to the organ to the mental state. And so that it actually meaningfully can, predict future diseases and other things. And I think we're just far away from that point, right? So I don't think a digital twin right now would be possible, right? But I could see advancement in sensors, built-in sensors, that can feed such a twin in the future, right? And that will give rise to a very interesting machine-driven medicine. I mean, we can talk about this, but I think we're far away from that. We just don't have the data to support this notion, in my opinion.
Very true. What do you think, Dr. Jesse? Do you see a potential use of creating a twin, that digital twin of yourself that can help with patient follow-up in case they have questions? Do you see any use case, or is it still a dangerous field?
I think there are technical and economic challenges, but I think as our expert pointed out, the biggest challenge right now is just the data.
Absolutely.
Right? Data quality issues, implementation costs, but also I think there are real cybersecurity concerns.
Yeah.
When you have that level of data that is so specific to an individual, if there's a singular breach or a breach at scale, the implications for any one person could be profound. So maybe it's out there, maybe we get there, but today I think there are a lot of barriers for that approach, but it could be important in the future.
Yeah, thanks so much for that point, because as we transition to our last section talking about the cybersecurity aspect, with so much data, especially specialized patient PHI, patient health information, how do we as physicians safeguard where our patients' data? How do we ensure that it's being used? What are the kind of technologies that you see that are needed in this field? Maybe you can talk a bit about your experience, Dr. Krauthammer, in terms of the handling the data, federated learning, encryption, whichever things that you feel are applicable.
Right. I mean, thank you for this very important question. So we do a lot of research with health data, right? So, and obviously, it's a big topic. Kind of, how can you share that with researchers in a way that is compliant with all the health laws and privacy laws? And so, a lot of things, right? You have to respect patients' wishes. Do they want to share the data, the consenting? But if they consent, right, you have to make sure it's secure, right? And so. There's issue about anonymization of data, right? So this is certainly something we can do quite well for different modalities, text, images. We're pretty good these days at hosting really secure servers, right, that are really we can trust, not only inside the hospitals, but even outside the hospitals. For some of you who are listening, you might want to use cloud services, right? So that's where it becomes a bit tricky if you can't control the service, right? So, for example, if you use certain services from big vendors, right, you have to make sure that that service offering doesn't involve, for example, human review in any stage of hosting the data. So you have to look at these things. So clearly, security is key, right? But then there are other things, right, which we just learned about. Let's say I train a model, a radiology model in Zurich, right, and I give it to Jesse to test in the US. How do I make sure that this model didn't memorize specific patient information? We don't know enough about these kind of hidden privacy risks, right, that could linger somewhere in an AI model or in a large language model and so forth. So it's very tricky, right? And then lastly, right, about whether you can, there's obviously the thing that you can change a model so, it may cheat, right? And how can you prevent that? So clearly you have to test your model really clearly, right? Whether, everything is going as you planned, right? There's no cheating going on. There's no intrusion and changing of weights, for example. of a model. So there's a lot of things, right? And how to ensure that, I have to say, we're just learning how to really ensure integrity of systems.
We
Wait,
could keep going on, I think, on the topics, and but I think we want to give some time to answer some of the questions. We had some questions sent in advance. So I would ask actually if we could all, let's keep our answers as short as possible so we can answer as many questions, because we've caught quite a few that came through, a couple of questions on bias. So I'm going to go first to a question that was sent to us before. How can we integrate AI into medical education without compromising the quality of learning and educational standards?
Right. So this is it's a very good question, and I guess it's a more profound question, is in the sense, what basic skills do we need to know, right, to be effective and critical physicians? And we don't delegate everything early on, right, to these tools. And I think what is a basic skill, and when can you actually teach the student to augment these skills, right, with very detailed knowledge through, for example, chatbot, right? This is an ongoing kind of exercise that we're trying to understand. In Zurich, for example, we are teaching the use of chatbots late in the curriculum, right? So it's a traditional curriculum up to now, mostly, where you have to memorize and you have to become kind of, you have to be a self-assured physician, and then we learn how you can use LLMs to improve your decision making. And then obviously we have to think about how to do that effectively. Should we teach students to first make a decision, medical kind of a management decision, or what, first, and then consult the tool, or do anything else? So this is kind of these are questions we are trying to address.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dr. Michael. We're going to try something a bit different, try to take one or two live questions that were sent in. Dr. DeHoller, would you like to ask your question? I think you're unmuted.
I am. Thanks, Jacob. Well, it's a very practical question. Michael Krauthammer, you've addressed this a little bit already, but I'd like a very practical answer on the level of a physician in his office. You said that ChatGPT-4 is more than 90% accurate in tests, and that's very good indeed. Now, when I am thinking of a diagnosis for a patient, I have more or less a clear feeling of certainty. I mean, I'm pretty sure or not so sure, or a better check or whatever. Do large language models have the capacity of quantifying the degree of certainty in the answer they give, and how do they express this in the answer as a physician?
It's a very good question. I think language models are known to be not so good with probabilities, and I'm not sure if they're better now than they used to be. Interestingly, the old diagnostic support systems, which kind of built in the 90s or so, they would give you a real probability because they were more kind of statistical based. So I think language models are not that good at giving probabilities, right? But they can explain themselves, right? And the way these tools are typically assessed is by give me the 5 most likely diagnoses, and then they're assessed in is the true diagnosis among them, right? So it still delegates the final choice to the doctor. But the answer is, I think they're not. My understanding is they're not that good at actually giving you a probability, but that might also improve over time. So,
Jesse,
Dr. Krauthammer, we had some.
Yeah, please go ahead, Jesse.
We had some questions come in about ethical issues, and the WMA has obviously been an important contributor to international the field of international medical ethics, and has really promulgated several really important foundational documents. And one of the questions that we got was really a broad question about, how do we ensure the ethical use of AI across healthcare settings? The AMA spent a lot of time thinking about this. The WMA spent a lot of time thinking about this. But I'm curious, from your standpoint, at a high level, what are some of the more important ethical considerations for the use, the development, the implementation of these technologies?
Right. Well, there's so many dimensions there, right? I mean, personally, I'm trying to challenge myself in my own research to keep that dimension in my head, essentially. And the way I do that is I work with ethicists or philosophers to accompany my research, especially the high-risk research, right? And so, just for an example, the work on gene editors, right? I've been in discussion with a group of ethicists, and so is it okay to release these tools? Because gene scissor is obviously a very powerful tool. I talked to medical ethicists about the use of AI in high-risk situations, such as, for example, deciding whether you should do live CPR in patients where you don't know whether they would want to have this, and so all these kind of issues, and so that's the first thing, right? You have to. It's a multidisciplinary activity, right? And then obviously the more practical aspects, right? We talked a little bit about trust and the bias. I think another big aspect is transparency. I think it should be very clear when AI is used in the office or in some pathway. And lastly, I think what will be really, really important is in the future is how do we know that the interaction between the AI and the physician is ethical, and whether the physician really makes use of these tools in an appropriate fashion, and in an appropriate skeptical fashion, for example. So many dimensions, but these are kind of my answers here.
We have time
we
for
may have to invite
question.
you to help the WMA frame some of these
yeah.
some of these ethical issues. There's no shortage, and I know they'll have a lot of ground to cover in the coming years.
Jesse, I think we have time only for one more. I'd like to tell anyone that if your question is not answered, we're going to take that, and in the document that we send, we'll make sure we address it and send it. But I saw an interesting question from Julie Macron. Have health insurers used AI to override physicians' judgment and deny coverage? What is your experience? So I'd love the
Okay,
AMA
I think
Dr. Krauthammer.
this should go to Jesse, because I wouldn't know about this, right? This sounds like a horror scenario.
Yeah.
And
unfortunately, there's growing shocking evidence, at least in the U.S., of health insurance companies using algorithms and other tools to broadly deny care. And so we think that this is fundamentally inappropriate, ethically objectionable, and not in anyone's best interest. So we're trying to figure out from a regulatory standpoint how to deal with it. But we expect that there'll be global trends of companies using AI tools to do things that ultimately are in their financial best interest, but not our patients' long-term health. And I think it'll be an ongoing challenge.
Right, but I could just, maybe the last thing is one can flip it, right? I mean, you could also say for a patient who asks an insurance company for support for a rare drug, right? AI could give you the support, right, to justify that drug. So I think maybe there's also on the flip side, there's a bright side to that, right?
Thank you so much for your insights, and we've reached the end of another session. I want to first off thank our incredible speaker, Dr. Michael Krauthammer, for the role, his giving us the role of AI in healthcare with such clarity and expertise. Also, heartfelt thanks to my wonderful co-host, Dr. Jesse. As always, your energy has been invaluable for us to do this. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us, making this webinar so vibrant. I want to assure you that the questions that weren't answered, we'll make sure that we do send that. So that's to Firas, Ibrahim, others who have sent it in. We'll make sure we answer those questions in the document we send out. And I want to just say a shout out to the amazing team behind the scenes, to Clarice, Magda, and Marie from the WMA Secretariat, and Michelle from the IMA. The work that goes behind the scenes to make this webinar happen and continuously happen without any fail has been a group effort, not just myself and Dr. Jesse here. So looking forward to what's next. We have on April 30th, our fourth session. We've crossed the halfway mark, and now we're moving to our fourth session, the best practices in medical AI development. We're going to explore how the development process behind how the AI tools are made, how they're built, what you as a physician need to know, and why these matter as technologies see wider adoption. It's about empowering you to understand and shape the tools that transform healthcare. Our speaker will be Dr. Natalie, head of the ARC, Accelerate, Redesign, and Collaborate at the Shiva Medical Center. She's a physician and an industry leader in digital health and application of AI-based technologies. So her expertise, I'm sure, will bring a fresh perspective on innovating and development in this space. And I can't wait for you to hear from her alongside with myself and Dr. Jesse next month. Please keep the conversation going. Please send us your feedback from today and your questions for April 30th. Your input is what keeps this series relevant and impactful. And with that, Jesse, do you want to add anything as we sign off? So thank you again,
Thank you so much,
Michael.
Dr. Krauthammer.
Let's see this forward. We'll see you guys on April 30th. Take care.